Hello everyone, I am Rob, here in my guise as Lord Cajun DeFlynn in my Ask the Wizard series. Upon completion of shooting my latest episode of Ask the Wizard, I realized that I hadn't done a proper State of the Dungeon address for the last game of Dungeons & Dragons that I ran, so since I usually wear a hat for these things, but I don't get all dressed up, I thought the novelty would be fun, so I'm doing it this way. So this was for the game that was played on the 5th of July. The game was 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. All expected players arrived. The player of Dakith was not in attendance. So this was kind of a watershed session. It is going to be one of the last ones for the GM NPC Glob, as the group is large enough that they don't need a GM NPC, especially one who throws fireballs, which I find is too dynamic for the GM NPC to have on a group, unless the group is really, truly diminished. So the GM NPC will be changing to something less dynamic and probably more useful to the group as time permits. But in addition, we're also adding another player next session. My wife will be joining us. Her name is Melissa. She's got a fair amount of experience, especially with me as the dungeon master, and she's quite good. She'll be playing a monk. But this session was about cleanup. The group prior, if you remember, had penetrated into the Temple of Elemental Evil of Air and had killed the prophetess of air, Arisi. Arisi Kalinoff. And she died pretty ignominiously. They broke in through her outer defenses relatively easily, having just killed a couple of Kenku, then some of their basic initiates. Eventually broke into the actual temple itself and attacked her. She had a Vrock as a companion, which they slaughtered, and eventually they grappled her down. There's a very simple formula for taking out spellcasters. If they can't cast spells, they're not very dangerous. She got off her Chain Lightning, her best spell, but she was, unfortunately, I could have probably played her a little bit better. If she'd been flying, for instance, would have made things a lot more interesting. But they got to her before she could get away successfully, so took her down, stopped her from casting spells, and eventually killed her. So they had to leave, and they knew that outside there were 2 wyverns with riders, and the riders are spellcasters. And the group had been beat up a bit. They didn't dream of trying to take a rest, because it was only a matter of time, and they were pretty sure the psychic scream of the death cry was heard by her followers, and they were going to get attacked. So they decided to be preemptive about it. They marched out of the temple, holding her head, and imagining that by proving that they had destroyed the most powerful of their lot, they would drive the rest of them away. The group did not understand what a fanatic is. The people who went through the horrible things of initiation that the cult of the Howling Hatred did to each other, even their faith being shaken by their leader being destroyed was not going to shatter their fundamentalist fervor. So, and the other thing too was before the fight, I had set up the lower level of the temple, because that's where I had imagined the fight would take place. They marched out of the temple and lost all of the advantages of fighting inside and making the enemy come to them. This did not end well. So what happened? Terran and Abor came out first. Terran said, "I have defeated your Arisi Kalinoff. Leave. Get out of here. We win." And Abor was kind of rocky. They had first done, a quick check to see how everybody was doing. And everybody said that they were okay. If they weren't, Glim healed them up a bit quick. At this point, Geth had not joined the group. His player was still absent. He comes a little bit later because of his work situation. So, the they mounted her head on a boar's pike, polearm, his halberd, and the second in command, who was wearing plate armor, but he was also one of these flying wizards. He instead said, "Whoever can end the life of the last living one of their number becomes my second in command." And he blasted a boar. And a boar wasn't nearly as healed up as he said he was. One blast and a failed dex save, and he went down. Which, of course, didn't really make the group happy, because now they had to heal him to get him up and to stop him from dying. The next thing that happened was all of the hurricanes, these are the monks, they also had access to some spells. Rarely had I used them because their hand-to-hand combat, when they attacked in number, had a better damage potential in the end. But I said they were fanatics, right? So all of them moved up to ring Terran, and they all cast Thunderwave at the same time, knowing full well that the wash from each other's Thunderwaves were going to hit all of their group. They were all going to take the damage, and they were all probably going to die. But they were going to take down their toughest foe with them. And he got rocked. He didn't die from that. Terran is a hard nut to crack. But they didn't have to hit his really high armor class. They just had to cast their spells and some damage would be dealt. Out of them, I think all of the hurricanes dropped from this effect, though, because they all got hit with five of them as well. They were ringing him. Terran weathered it. The hurricanes did not. And there was a boar who got hit with 4 of those himself. The only one who didn't was the one directly across from Terran when he detonated. I was feeling merciful as a dungeon master, because I understand that if you take damage while you are at 0 hit points, that counts as a failed death save. 4 failed death save is more than enough to completely kill him. He hadn't made a single death save yet, so I thought I would leave it in the hands of fate. I told him, if you can make a saving throw against the Constitution effect, the Constitution saving throw against their effect, we won't count that as a failed death save. He was automatically going to get flung anyhow by the power of the spells. But I gave him a chance. And it was a Constitution saving throw. He's a dwarven paladin. I don't believe Constitution is one of their preferred saves, but he's a dwarf. He had pretty good shots. And the saving throws weren't that difficult. I think they were 12s. So he makes a saving throw. He makes 2 of them, fails 2. That's 2 failed death saves. And he gets flung into the temple. Terran is also immediately set upon by the wyvern, who pounces him. And I think he got racked by a lightning bolt too, possibly. I think he did. And so he drops. So immediately 2 of the frontline fighters are down. The rest of the group needs to rally. Auric, of course, ever being the opportunist, he mostly spent his time inside, using the temple as cover, and firing out. He is better at ranged combat, although he has a lot of hit points, being a tough dwarf. But he was fighting from range where he could. Glim got a boar up again. And he charged the wyvern that was on top of Terran. Because the rider had demonstrated how ruthless he was, he told the wyvern to start feeding. And immediately he went and took a chomp out of Terran's shoulder, meaning failed death saves again. Meaning that as long as he stayed up there, Terran was going to continue to take failed death. He was going to continue to die, basically. So Glim moves up and smacks that wyvern twice in the face with his axe. He's invoking one of his divine powers to get a second attack in because he follows a war god. And he did a substantial amount of damage to that wyvern. He had to take notice. And there were 3 spellcasters They're skyweavers, as they're called, who normally ride wyverns, but in this case, they were running out of wyverns, quite honestly. The other wyvern and some of the reinforcements were on the far side because they were going to get into both sides of the Ziggurat temple. So half of the evil force was not in on this fight initially. And even without them, they still were able to keep down a lot of the fighters. The wyvern forced open the door and started coming in the backside. Now, what kind of gave the group an equalizer was the djinn that they had released, sort of released. They were now commanding it. And the djinn moved up to attack the Skyweaver. The Skyweaver produced a scroll and banished the djinn. The djinn's like, oh my gosh, I didn't think you'd do that! And vanished. And they're like, and then the Skyweaver's like, ha 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 ha, you fools. Well, as the other djinn came, or the other wyvern came flying in, all of a sudden, the creature that was down in the pit in the center of the temple that they were throwing sacrifices down to, tentacles shot up and grabbed the wyvern and started dragging it down, and the genie shot out of there and said, well, I guess he was hungry after all. They're like, you didn't get banished? She's like, nah, I just needed them to think I was. So then he went in and he got involved in the fight, which is what they desperately, desperately needed. Glob had come out, too, in support of the group to try to hold off some of the onrush of the second wave that was running around. Remember, monks, they're pretty fast, so they came running around the sides. Glob knew that they didn't have any kind of a wall up to defend themselves, and him just having his burning sphere wasn't going to stop anybody, so he moved up to present himself as a target. And he had shield as a spell, so he was able to throw up and make himself fairly hard to hit. And he didn't think the hurricanes that were coming around were all that tough. And they proved to not be all that tough. He got hit a few times, but nothing too deadly. He was also, however, their backup, because he has the foresight to have contact healing potions. None of the others have even asked where he got them from, or, ever looked for them themselves. So he spends the money, the little pittance that they give him, on these healing potions. And so he had a decision to make. Terran is on the ground. Terran had the benefits of an enlarged person spell cast on. Glim had done that. And Glob, the Goblin Wizard, had cast that on him. Glob had also cast Mirror Image on himself to give himself a chance against these hurricanes as he was trying to defend himself. But when he was turning around and looking, he had two choices. He had Glim, who was a healer and could heal others, and who was a dwarf and was rotten to him, honestly, constantly saying bad things about him. I don't know if you've ever healed Glob. But in general, tactically, getting your healer up is a good thing. Or Terran, who he had already invested a spell in, and Terran had always been very nice to Glob. Wasn't much of a decision. He threw his contact healing potion out amidst the hurricanes that were attacking him, threw out and hit Terran. Terran grabbed the wyvern and gave it a belly-to-belly suplex off of him and threw it out and wiped out one of the other Skyweavers. He injured the wyvern, and he rolled like a 20 on his strength to throw it. Legitimately, he rolled really well. He crushed the Skyweaver, because if you have a guy with that much strength throwing a big wyvern on top of you, it's going to hurt. He had already been injured because Geth had showed up and he had thrown a lightning bolt down and injured a couple of the Skyweavers. So getting squashed by the wyvern hurled by Terran's strength, that killed him. It injured the wyvern, and it also pinned his rider underneath the wyvern too. So it was quite the coup d'etat there. He got some more healing right away, but he was still in a very bad way. The group was still in a fairly dire position. The djinn came out and started to help them out. Oric came out and started to help out and found ways of using the cover of the temple, hiding, and then popping out and sneak attacking was proving very effective. The logical part of me is having a bit of a hard time encapsulating that, but as long as he's being able to break eye contact so that the other's not looking at him and he's looking at all the other battlefield things and then popping out and sniping, I don't have a huge problem with that. The rogue should use every opportunity they can to use their sneak attack, quite honestly, the way the 5th edition is structured. So, just like I've learned to not have a problem when the Battlemaster fighter, with every attack he makes, including bonus attacks, throws out his superiority dice and can end up doing some incredible burst damage. I've learned to understand and accept that. So he was popping out and being pretty effective as a sniper. They killed the wyvern. The other wyvern got dragged down into the temple. And when the Skyweavers were trying to conserve their lightning bolts against a truly tough foe, they were throwing witch bolts. They hit Oric. He just dodged around the temple, broke line of sight, so that ended that spell. They were familiar with that. And likewise, they were just punishing the other ones. They saved the lightning bolts, though, when Glim had run out. He got 3 lightning bolts on him, which is why he was down. The first one dropped him because he was more hurt than I thought. He took an initial lightning bolt through, too, from the opening salvo. And the other 2 were just failed death saves. So Terran was up and helped fight. Glim had to make a death save. He made his first one. Everything was okay. There's still a chance to save him. Glob was still kind of in a rough way, but he was getting some help. The Hurricanes were not that difficult. The group had pretty much learned how to mop them up. They were only good for about 40 hit points, and then they drop. And as far as combatants, they weren't too deadly. In hindsight, they probably should have done the martyrdom trick against Glob, though, because Glob did hurt him a bit. He was suffering from a lack of spell power himself. He had thrown all of his counter spells to nullify Arisi as much as he could, so he was kind of tapped out by then. And then Glim had to make his next death save, and he failed. Glim dies. For realsies. The group had killed off the leader, however. Legitimately, the guy who might have succeeded Khaleesi. Arisi. And it was quite clear they weren't going to be able to take the trident away, or the spear away from them. So the other remaining Skyweavers fled. They had fly spells up. They just flew away into the city, where the group was not going to be able to chase them down fast enough. The Hurricanes all died to a man, but there were just a couple of these, decent level spellcasters. They can fly and they can cast Lightning Bolt. They can cause quite a bit of trouble yet. But it was clear they were just going to die fighting against the party. Maybe they could have killed another member of the party, possibly. But their morale was pretty broken, so they left. Which left Terran, death's door knocking loudly. He was in pretty bad shape. Glim was dead. Abor was pretty shattered. He had to sit and suck down a couple of healing potions because he had thrown all of his potential healing spells, but one, which he ended up using to heal himself, on smite attacks and making his personal attacks hurt worse. So he was completely drained as well. He had nothing to fall back on. Geth was gasping. I think he had thrown his last lightning bolt too, and I don't know how much else he had. I'm guessing not much because he was down to cantrips at the end as well. Oric was in great shape. He even took a little damage, but nothing much. He constantly skates away without taking nearly as much as everyone else, but it worked out pretty well. And without the Jinn ended up chasing down stragglers. Well, of course, Glob is a bit hurt, but nothing too serious. So the group collects the sad remains of Glim, whatever other treasure they can scrounge up, and they leave. They decide to go back to Hamlet, which is not that far off. As soon as they get out of the valley, they're able to head there. And they leave. Nothing of any great significance really bothers them. I rolled for encounters and nothing really happened. So they get back to Hamlet. And they remind me that I had given Glim a scroll of true resurrection, which he told the rest of the group only works on dwarves, because that's Glim for you. And they're like, well, he's a dwarf. We have a scroll. I'm like, great. Can anybody cast resurrection ever in their careers? Do you have it on one of your sheets? None of them did. I'm like, well, paladins can't cast true resurrection. Sorcerers and wizards clearly can't. You're going to need an honest-to-goodness cleric. So they go to the All-Faith Shrine in Hamlet. Glim had helped out there, because he really didn't know what to do with himself the last time they had been in Hamlet, and that's also where he had gotten most of his training from the priest of St. Cuthbert, and at the moment they have a priestess of Ola Damara there, those two take turns taking care of the responsibilities of the shrine. It's just their luck, the priestess of Ola Damara was there. Ola Damara is the patron of adventurers and thieves, and she's like, oh, poor guy. He had a good side, deep down. It's a shame he died. And they're like, yeah, but look, we got a scroll of resurrection. We want him resurrected. And she's like, let me see that. Oh, that is a proper scroll of true resurrection. That is truly a relic. Okay, I can cast the spell, but I need 100 gold up front, which they paid easily. 100 gold is nothing compared to what they just took in. I think they paid her in silver, which she didn't mind. She can use. And she said, now, there's one thing I have to tell you about. If he decides that he does not want to come back, the spell can't make him come back. He'll be given a choice, as all who are resurrected get a choice. It's your call whether or not, or it's his call whether or not the spell works. All I'm doing is offering him a chance. And they're like, yeah, we understand that. And the player wanted to come back, so she's preparing the body because, even though she herself is not casting proper true resurrection, which would be a day's worth of work, she still believes that bringing life back to a dead body, that's certain things have to be done. So she's got to prepare the body. The group went off to go get a drink. I think one or two had a few other ideas, which we will resolve next time. And they come back and she casts the scroll. So, that is the state of the dungeon. Glim's down, but he'll probably get back up again. And, yeah. So, one of the temples has fallen. Let everybody rejoice. They were rewarded because the weather is getting a little bit better. Still not great. Still not ideal. It's still too bloody hot. Water still doesn't have a great deal of effect. But they don't have massive storms blowing all over the place, and the temperature has cooled off a bit, so they're all happy for that. So, looking forward to carrying on in the next step of Dungeons & Dragons in a week and a half. I'm Rob, here in my lair, and thanking you for joining me for this State of the Dungeon. Thank you. May you have many successful and safe adventures. Farewell.